Ready for another deep dive? Today, we're going to be looking at 9 things you should never accept from anyone.
Interesting title, right?
Yeah, and it's not just some random list. It uses these everyday things as metaphors for some pretty deep spiritual stuff.
It definitely goes beyond just like cleaning out your closet, you know?
Right.
This source uses 9 items. Let's see, there's mirrors and salt and mattresses and wallets, locks, jewelry, clothes, books, and plants.
Wow, that is quite a mix.
Yeah, and it uses those things as metaphors kind of to examine our relationship with God, with ourselves, and the world around us.
Okay, so let's jump right in. The first one on the list is mirrors.
Okay.
Which I thought was interesting. I mean, you usually think of mirrors in terms of vanity, right?
Yeah.
But the text is talking about mirrors in terms of spiritual introspection and authenticity.
It's a different way to look at them.
Yeah.
Like, it's not about how we look on the outside, but how we're reflecting Christ in our actions.
Mm-hmm.
Almost like the mirror becomes this visual reminder to, like, check in and ask ourselves, am I living in a way that aligns with my faith?
So it's like a daily gut check.
Yeah.
But instead of asking, does this make me look fat? You ask, does this make me look like a follower of Christ? Something like that.
Right, exactly.
And I really like how the text brings in the Bible on this.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Oh.
It uses 2 Corinthians 3.18. That one talks about reflecting God's glory.
Okay.
And then there's David, you know. He asks for a pure heart in Psalm 51.10.
Right.
And I think those verses really give some weight to this whole idea of using a mirror as a spiritual tool.
Okay, so moving on, the next item on the list is salt.
Salt.
Yeah, which is another thing we use every day but don't usually think of in like a spiritual way.
Right, exactly.
We all know it preserves and purifies food, but this text, it takes it a step further and connects it to the 2 roles that Christians are called to play in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Preservation and transformation.
Yeah, no.
It's a pretty challenging concept, honestly. Are we really living out both of these roles?
It is.
Like, are we preserving what's good and at the same time being agents of change in this kind of messed up world? It seems like a lot to ask.
Yeah, it is. And this source isn't afraid to talk about that. It reminds us about Matthew 5.13. That's where Jesus calls us the
Salt of the earth.
Yeah, the salt of the earth.
And then there's that story in 2 Kings, I think it's chapter 2, verse 21.
Yeah.
It's the one where Elisha purifies the water with salt. The water's bitter and he makes it good again.
Right.
And then the text makes this point that, you know, just like salt can lose its flavor, Christians can lose their spiritual passion if they're not careful.
It's true. And that's kind of a scary thought.
Yeah. So how do we make sure that doesn't happen? How do we stay salty, so to speak?
It's like anything else. You have to, stay connected to the source, to Jesus. You know, just like a plant needs water and sunlight to thrive, Christians need to keep getting nourished.
Okay.
By prayer, God's word, and fellowship with other Christians.
Yeah, I like that image, being nourished by faith. Okay, so next up on the list is mattresses.
The mattresses.
Yeah, kind of a weird jump from salt, right?
Yeah, I guess so.
What's the connection?
Well, think about it. A mattress is all about rest and rejuvenation.
Right.
And the text takes that and connects it to the deeper kind of rest that God offers.
Not just physical sleep.
Exactly.
Right.
It's about
finding peace in it.
No, it's about creating an environment, a spiritual one where we can really
unwind.
Yeah, unwind and connect with God.
Yeah, and this source, it actually uses some verses from Psalms.
Okay.
Psalm 4.8 talks about resting in God's protection.
Mm-hmm.
And then Psalm 127.2, it talks about rest being a blessing.
I like that. And, I think it's such an important message, like especially in today's world where everyone's always telling you to do more and be more.
Oh, I know. It's so easy to get caught up in that. Always busy, always striving. And we forget to just
be.
Yeah, just be. And to rest. Mm-hmm. Okay, so moving on from mattresses, we get to wallets and pockets.
Now we're talking.
Now it's getting practical, right?
It is.
The source's point is that what we carry in our wallets shows what's important to us.
It's true.
And then it asks this question. It asks, have we placed our security in our possessions?
Or in God.
Yeah, or in our connection with God. It's a good question, but kind of convicting.
Yeah, especially in today's materialistic world.
It is. It's like looking in a mirror again, but this time it's our spending habits we're looking at.
Exactly.
Are we using money in a way that honors God and shows our faith?
That's the big question. And the text reminds us that Matthew 6.19-21 tells us we shouldn't be storing up treasures here on earth. And then 1 Timothy 6.10 is even more direct. It says, the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil.
Whoa. Strong words.
It makes you think, right? Like our relationship with money.
Yeah.
It can be a big problem.
A stumbling block.
Yeah, in our walk with God.
So how do we manage money in a way that reflects our faith without getting, obsessive about it or legalistic?
That's a tough one. I think we might need a whole separate deep dive just on that.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But for now, I think the main takeaway is to be intentional.
Yeah.
We should ask ourselves, are my spending habits aligned with what I believe? And am I using my resources to make a difference?
Those are great questions.
Like, we need to see our finances through a spiritual lens.
Right.
They're tools for God's kingdom, not just for buying things.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's move on. Next on the list is locks.
Locks.
Which makes sense after wallets and pockets, right?
Protecting our stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
But also our hearts.
Yeah, and our minds. The source is saying we should be careful about what we let in.
Protecting ourselves.
Yeah. It's like locking our house at night, right?
Yeah.
To keep bad guys out.
Exactly.
We should do the same with our spirits, guarding ourselves against negative influences and toxic thoughts.
Okay.
But the text also says that we need to be careful not to lock out Jesus.
Oh, good point.
He wants access to all of us, even the parts we want to hide,
Yeah, that's good. And it ties in with that verse, Revelation 3.20.
Oh, right.
Where Jesus says, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into him and eat with him and he with me.
It's a beautiful image.
It is.
And it reminds us that true security comes not from hiding, but from
opening ourselves to God.
Yeah. And letting him in.
It's about
yeah.
It's about that balance, isn't it?
What do you mean?
Well, between protecting ourselves and being open to God's work.
It's hard to find that balance sometimes.
It is. But, I think it's worth the effort.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so we've talked about guarding our hearts, but what about what we choose to show on the outside?
Right.
So that brings us to jewelry.
Jewelry, okay.
And like a lot of these items, it has a practical side and a spiritual side.
Yeah, definitely.
The source uses jewelry to ask this question. It asks, are we more focused on outward appearances or the things that really matter to God?
It's a good question.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in how we look, you know, especially in a culture that's like obsessed with image.
Oh, yeah, totally.
But I like how the text brings in 1 Timothy 2.9-10.
What does that one say?
It's about focusing on good works and being modest instead of wearing flashy jewelry. Okay,
so it's saying that real beauty comes from within.
Yeah, exactly. And then it brings in 1 Peter 3.3 for 4, which talks about a gentle and quiet spirit. It says that kind of beauty never fades.
That's really different from, the latest fashion trends.
Right. Those are here today and gone tomorrow.
Exactly.
It's like those verses are saying that character is the most valuable jewel we can have.
Okay, yeah, I see that.
Which leads us to the next item on the list, clothing.
Clothing, okay.
And the text makes a pretty interesting connection here.
I'm curious. What is it?
Well, it says it's not just about the clothes themselves.
Okay.
It's about what they represent.
Interesting. What do they represent?
The source says clothing is a symbol of righteousness and holiness, like the garments of salvation that God gives us.
Okay, yeah. That makes sense.
So it's about putting on the new self. We choose to clothe ourselves in, like, Christian virtues.
Okay.
Instead of the old habits and thoughts that we need to get rid of.
Yeah, it's about aligning how we act with what we believe. Letting our outside match the change that's happening on the inside.
Right, and the text connects this to some verses in the Bible. It uses Isaiah 61.10.
What's that one about?
It describes the garments of salvation.
Oh.
And then Colossians 3.1, that one talks about putting on compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience.
Wow, that's quite a wardrobe.
Right. It's like we have all these virtues to choose from every day. And it reminds me of Ephesians 4.22-24. That one talks about taking off the old self and putting on the new.
Yeah, I like that. It's a powerful image of change and renewal.
It is. It reminds us that becoming more like Christ is a process. It's a daily choice to get rid of the stuff that doesn't reflect who we are in him.
It's the journey.
It is. And speaking of things that shape who we are, the next item is books.
Books? Okay.
Especially the Bible.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Books can be so powerful for spiritual growth. The source really emphasizes that, especially when it comes to the Bible.
Yeah, it's like they're sources of divine communication,
Right.
you know?
Right.
But it's not just about reading passively, you know?
What do you mean?
It's not just like skimming through the words. This source is pushing us to really engage with the Bible, to think hard about its truths and let them change us.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. It's not just about taking in information. It's about letting it transform us.
Exactly.
And speaking of transformation, I'm curious, how have you wrestled with this tension between faith and finances in your own life?
Ooh, good question.
Like, how do you put these principles into practice?
Well, for me, it's been a process, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I think the biggest thing has been learning to surrender control. It's so easy to try to manage everything myself. But I've found that when I let go of my finances and trust God, it really frees me up.
Frees you up to do what?
Well, it lets me be more generous and use what I have in a way that aligns with God's purposes. It's still a journey, but I'm learning to see money as a tool for God's kingdom.
Wow, that's powerful. It's a reminder that our relationship with money can really reflect our relationship with God.
Definitely.
And it ties back to this idea of being intentional, right? Making choices that match our values and what we believe.
Exactly. It's about aligning our actions with our faith. And not just with our finances, but in everything we do.
Yeah, I think that's one of the key takeaways from this whole deep dive.
Totally.
It's not enough to just know these things. We have to actually live them out.
We have to put them into practice.
So it's about going from theory to action,
Right.
From knowing to doing.
Exactly. It's in the doing that we truly grow and become more like Christ.
It's like that saying, faith without works is dead.
Right. We have to walk the walk, not just talk the talk.
Exactly. Speaking of walking, the last item on the list takes us back to nature. It's plants.
Plants. Okay.
The source uses plants as an analogy for spiritual growth.
Interesting. How so?
Well, just like plants need nourishment to grow, so do we.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not just about taking care of our physical needs,
It's about our spiritual needs too, right?
Exactly. And the source brings in John 15.5.
What's that one about?
That's where Jesus says, I am the vine, you are the branches. Oh yeah. Whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing.
Powerful verse.
It is. It reminds us that our spiritual growth depends on our connection with Christ. And I also love that the source uses Psalm 1.3.
Yep.
That one compares a righteous person to a tree planted by streams of water.
That's a great image.
It is. It's an image of flourishing, of producing fruit that can nourish others.
Right. But I guess growth isn't always easy, right?
No, it's not. And the text acknowledges that. Sometimes growth can be messy and painful. It can even involve pruning.
Pruning, like cutting things away.
Yeah, exactly. It's a reminder that sometimes we have to let go of things that are holding us back, even if it hurts.
Oh, I see. It's about trusting that God knows what's best for us, even when it's hard.
Right. And that he's using those tough times to shape us.
Will make us stronger.
Exactly. To make us more like him. And I think that's encouraging no matter where we are in our spiritual journey. As we've been going through these 9 things we shouldn't accept, I keep thinking about this idea of balance.
Balance.
Yeah, like we're trying to find that sweet spot between really going for spiritual growth and also like surrendering to God's grace.
It's kind of a paradox, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess so.
We're called to, actively participate in our faith.
Yeah.
But then we also have to remember it's God who's really doing the work.
It's like we're working with God to become more like Christ. We're putting in the effort, but we're also relying on him.
Exactly. And I think we see this idea of balance in all 9 of the things we've been talking about.
Oh, okay.
Like, think about mirrors. We're supposed to be honest with ourselves about where we're messing up.
Yeah.
But we also need to remember that God loves and accepts us anyway.
Even with all our flaws.
Right, exactly. It's about holding on to both of those truths at the same time.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
And then there's salt. It's about preservation and transformation. It's like we're supposed to hold on to what's good, but also be agents of change.
Because the world needs it. Right.
Yeah.
Healing and all that.
Exactly. It's a tough balance, though.
It is. How do we even know what to preserve and what needs to change?
That's where wisdom comes in.
Yeah.
And that's where mattresses fit into all of this. We need to make time for rest and thinking so we can hear God and make the right decisions.
It's like creating a quiet space where we can connect with God, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then from that place of rest, we can look at our finances, our wallets and pockets with a clearer perspective.
We won't be so focused on just getting more stuff.
Right. And we can start seeing our money as a gift from God that we can use to help others.
Okay, that makes sense. What about locks?
Well, locks remind us that we need to protect our hearts and minds from things that will pull us away from God.
But we don't want to shut Jesus out.
Exactly. He wants to be a part of everything.
So it's like we're protecting ourselves, but also staying open to God.
Right. And as we learn to guard our hearts, we can focus on developing real beauty, the kind that comes from, from having Christ in our lives.
That's where jewelry and clothing fit in.
Exactly. It's not about how we look on the outside. It's about the transformation happening on the inside.
Okay, so what about books? Where do they fit in?
Books, especially the Bible, are like food for our souls. They can teach us so much and help us grow.
Right. It's like we're taking in the truth and letting it change us from the inside out. And last but not least, we have plants.
Ah, yes, plants. They remind us that spiritual growth takes time and the right conditions.
It's like we need to stay connected to Jesus, our source of life, so we can keep growing.
It's a beautiful picture of the spiritual life, isn't it? It's about balance, surrender, growth, and change. Well, you don't have to do it alone. God is with us the whole way.
That's such a comforting thought.
It is. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one question. What area of your life needs more balance? Where are you holding on too tight or not engaging enough? I think that's a good place to start as we try to get rid of the things that are holding us back from growing spiritually and experiencing all that God has for us.
That's a great question to think about. And I hope our listeners are inspired to make even small changes in the right direction. This has been a really insightful conversation.
I agree. It's always fun to explore these things with you. And for our listeners, keep seeking, keep growing, and keep trusting God. He's got you.
That's perfect. Thanks for joining me for this deep dive. I'm already looking forward to our next one.
Me too. Until next time.